part of our problem as a culture is that we only address things when they are a problem. So what we don't know is, I mean, we talk about it at the end of everything, is that there's strengths as well, and those kids are resilient. So when you say what are the important things of dealing, the first thing that comes to mind is that our whole paradigm and way of talking it is in the negative. So I think changing that paradigm into the positive, if we can, and really believing when we look at that child and that family what their strengths are and what they've gained from this experience and what they have to offer. And I don't mean it just in a kind of perfunctory way. I actually think it hasn't been measured, the kinds of leadership skills that kids have, the kind of other side of the tunnel that many kids have come out from in a stronger way, not only the difficulties. And I do believe it's there. I look at our MSW students here, who some of them you've videotaped and interviewed. These are strong people. These are people who are able to help other people in ways that they maybe couldn't have had they not gone through these experiences. So these are tremendous strengths that have to be celebrated. So when I think about what can be done it has to be both those things, not just their needs, not just the difficulties that they've gone through, but being able to look at somebody in the face and eye and really convey to them the belief that they have the strength and the ability to change this world in a very positive way, and have them know that you feel and think that they're not just somebody that has a lot of problems and difficulties. I'd say that's the most important thing, in my opinion. And when you look at other countries and how they've dealt with it, it's very informative, because I think some of the things that we have here in the United States are unique to the United States. And that's that we have a draft, and we have, when we had a draft, we didn't have these kinds of issues. I think it's because of the voluntary nature of our, that it creates an us and them kind of, and that is important with every military child that you look at, that's going to be there with that family and that kid. There's a feeling that we are separate, that civilian culture doesn't necessarily understand us, that we have a lot to offer, but that's not always seen. And there are issues that are unique to us. So we have to change that within our culture, because when you look at other cultures, for example, Israel, where I've done a lot of my work, everybody goes to the army there, almost everybody, the vast majority. So this issue that the teacher or the bus driver or don't understand me or what I've been through is irrelevant. And what's interesting, you don't see the same kind of dynamic of almost being a minority group or an oppressed group in some ways. Similar dynamics. It'd be very, very, very important for us to change that, so that when we look at a military child, we understand that this is part of multiculturalism. They're just another culture. They're just another part of our society, and not from a deficit perspective.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been asking some of the interviewees, that what do you think the difference is between, excluding Camp Pendleton, because I think that their base school is run by the state, between base schools?
Their base school is actually run by the districts. Oh. They're run by Oceanside, which are here, and by Fallbrook. That's what's interesting about this. Even though they're on base, they're run by civilian school boards and by civilian superintendents.
And I think that's a good aspect, but a lot of the base schools aren't run that way. And what do you think the differences are?
The vast majority of them in the United States are.
Yeah?
Yeah, except for the Dodia schools on the East Coast. There's a handful of them that are, but the rest of them are, which is kind of interesting. You would think that, but that's not necessarily true.
Do you think there are still differences between those schools versus public schools?
Well, that's a very good scientific empirical question that we need to take a look at, because when you look at some of the Dodia schools internationally, for example, academic outcomes, and you look at how they're actually much higher than the national average. So you would think these are the same kids that have the same transitions, same risk factors, same issues, but they seem to be doing much better academically, at least by their overall numbers, and college attendance, a variety of other different outcomes. Customer satisfaction surveys also seem to be much higher in those schools. This kind of gave us the thought well, first of all, the same kind of work has to be done with the civilian schools to see what they're doing, because we don't know. It's just, we're guessing from the stories that we heard. So our study will be the first to gather that kind of data. But assuming that the feeling of the public is correct, that somehow these schools are not doing as well academically, it could be that these base schools, run by DODEA in particular, have teachers that are trained by DODEA, principals that understand military culture. They're in contained environments where it's more of a community village feeling. You can't get into that much trouble anyways, even if you wanted to. And that the parameters are very clear of what those norms and what those cultures are around it. If that's true, then the school and the community play a very powerful impact, because those kids would have the same risk factors that other kids would have, but the outcomes wouldn't be as bad. We don't know about mental health outcomes. We'd have to look at that too, which would suggest that the civilian schools, if that's true, should become more like those other schools. In other words, almost like military family-friendly centric schools, if you wanted to think about it. And we already have those existing if the data is true. So yeah, they are a little bit different, but I would distinguish between base schools that are run by civilian versus those run by DODEA. Some of them are very, very sensitive and staffed, but some of them do not have it. And at least when you talk to anecdotally to families who have been in both, many of them appreciate the kind of education they get in the military-centric schools run by DODEA, because, and they very actively mention that everybody kind of understands each other, everybody gets what's going on. That doesn't always happen at a base school with 100% military kids run by a civilian school district. That's part of the thing we're going to be looking at to see, in fact, whether these beliefs by the general public are true or whether they're false. We don't know. That's at least what people think. But if it is true, we should make those teachers and principals understand what's so powerful in those other schools so they could emulate it.
How do you think the public education has responded to the needs of the military-connected students?
Well, you know, it's not just what I think, it's what I was mentioning earlier. Congress has actively come out and that's what the memorandum of understanding is between the Department of Education and the Department of Defense, is that this has not been looked at very carefully until 2008. So we know that they need more supports. That's been acknowledged publicly. That's public policy. That's not a bone of contention. What's not clear is whether these military kids are actually doing worse than the other kids in their own districts and their own classes. We have to actually follow that up empirically. It could be that kids from military bases are actually doing similar or better than other kids, but that the districts just have overall lower performing for a lot of reasons, economics, and all the reasons why we have the school reform efforts we do across the United States that have little to do with military populations. We still have to really carefully look at that, because many of the studies that have been done with kids who have been referred to mental health systems, kids who are referred to social services, and not as a population as a whole.
What do you hope that these students and interns that are taking this workshop, what do you hope that they learn and get out of the workshops this week?
Well, number one, I hope that what we'll be training them is to work as professionals with these families and students, understanding that military culture is a culture. That's the first step for understanding the families and the kids. And the second one is that will give them enough tools so that they'll be able to work with principals, number one. Nothing happens without the principal really approving it and going it, and teachers, number two, so they could transfer these skills to creating a culture of acceptance, of wraparound warmth, of collegiality, and of understanding some of the trials and tribulations that the families go through, but also to utilize the tremendous strengths that these kids and families have to really dig deep hard and to see maybe what's in front of their faces. And we may have to do research to pull that out. So that we could have multiple examples so people could say, yeah, I could see how that would work. Simple ideas sometimes of having students tutor other students who have been from similar backgrounds, or just being their buddies, or training them through, or network systems after they've been, now we have technology following them over time so that they have a cadre of friends all over the world. That may be happening naturally, we don't know. But schools could help facilitate that if they know what to do, and if our students have those skills, they could prompt those from going on. The third thing I think that's most important for them to do is to have everything data-driven and research. It should not be going by my opinion or your opinion or a congressperson's opinion or other people's opinion. We should be looking at what the students themselves are telling us on an ongoing basis, what the parents are telling us, what the teachers are telling us, and adapting to what their needs are in those situations. A one-size-fits-all, we know for sure will not work. Just in our project, we have close to 150 schools. We know there's diversity even within each district for each of those schools. If we do a one-size-fits-all, we are sure that it won't work in many schools. So we have to really fit it to each place, to every need of every grade, to every family.
Is there any other aspect of this program that you'd like to talk about or discuss?
Well, I mean, from a policy perspective right now where we're at, I do believe we're at a juncture where we have opportunities, particularly with the reauthorization of the No Child Left Behind coming up. Hopefully it will come up in the next year. I think it's extremely important that military-connected schools are included in the new legislation so that they're seen as a group that could use extra resources, particularly because of the issues of multiple transitions, multiple deployments, and all the things that we had talked about up until now. They have not really been included in the school reform movement, even though, like I mentioned earlier, there's 2 million kids that have gone through schools since the war. And it could be that when you just look at test scores and you don't know what are going on with that these transitions have made an impact in terms of not only the kids, but the schools. Schools are getting punished, actually, by having lots of military kids if, for whatever reason, they didn't get the tutoring or the academic supports with all these many transitions. That's something that we should include so that we can measure it, so we could see maybe those schools need extra tutoring, extra academic support, smaller classes, and we really hope from a policy perspective they'll start looking at that. The other thing is the Interstate Compact, hoping that at the federal level there could be even greater efforts to make sure that kids at the high school level get their credits counted and credit recovery so that they don't have to go again through the terrible of having to retake classes over and over, not graduating, and really feeling disrespected by our society, even though that's not the intention of the superintendents and teachers. So those are two major policy issues we hope we'll be able to make an impact on.